So over the next 2+ years, a series of set-piece encounters take place between Luther and his various opponents, in which Luther, to his intense frustration, repeatedly attempts to have this conversation, this argument about the nature of salvation, about what it means to be a justified sinner, and in which his opponents repeatedly refuse to have that argument, because they now insist that this is a matter not of theology but of obedience, that the church has commanded him with its full authority to submit, and he is refusing to do so. And until he's willing to show himself an obedient son of the church, it's impossible to talk about anything else. And so Luther finds himself led down this argument which initially he has no wish to follow. The crux comes in the summer of 1519, a year and a half into this controversy, when he has won maybe the most important of these great set-piece confrontations at Leipzig in Saxony, up against probably the most able theological opponent he ever faces, Johannes Eck. Eck comes to Leipzig well aware of what Luther has been arguing and of what he needs to do. Ideally, of course, what he wants is to obtain a full recantation from Luther to get him to conform to the church. But it's already becoming clear that Luther has titanic reserves of stubbornness, and that this is not what's likely to happen. And so his next best option would be to to force Luther to out himself, to make it clear that he really is a heretic in the full sense of somebody who has chosen his own opinions. Heresy derives from the Greek word for choice. Someone who has chosen his own opinions rather than obediently accepting what the church teaches. In other words, that he is a self-willed man rather than an obedient son. And Eck's technique to achieve this is to use a previous heretic, Jan Hus, the Bohemian heretic who'd been condemned at the Council of Constance and more than a century earlier in 1415 and burned. So what he does is it goes in to prove that some of Luther's views are those which had already been condemned as Hussite more than a century earlier. And he successfully backs Luther into a corner on this and forces Luther to take maybe the most extraordinary decisive step of his life, which is to say that if his beliefs had already authoritatively been condemned by the entire church as represented by the body of the Council of Constance, well, then the church must be wrong, and he, Luther, must be right. Luther seems to take this step almost without fully realizing quite what a radical decision he's taking. That he's throwing over not simply the authority of a particular papal bull or even the authority of the papacy as such. He's throwing over the authority of an ecumenical council of the church, the Council of Constance, and is in effect appealing to no human authority other than bare scripture as interpreted by his own conscience. So the argument about obedience, which his opponents been wanting to have all the way along, has forced him to this point where he's had to enunciate a doctrine of authority which goes radically against anything that the church had previously accepted.